20 doctors stood helpless around her bed. A young cop, strong, fearless, the pride of her city, was slipping away, and no one knew why. Machines beeped, prayers were whispered, but hope was fading fast. And then, from a prison cell just floors above, a man in shackles whispered 3 words that would change everything. Who was he? What did he see that the experts missed? Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you breathless. At St. Mary's General Hospital in downtown Chicago, the fluorescent lights in the intensive care unit burned cold and relentless. 20 doctors surrounded the bed of Detective Laura Mitchell, their brows furrowed, their voices dropping to whispers of confusion. Machines beeped with uneven rhythms, as if echoing the chaos inside her failing body. Laura was only 35, yet she had already built a reputation as one of the toughest detectives in the city. In her years with the Chicago Police Department, she had walked into drug dens, broken up organized crime networks, and faced down men twice her size without flinching. Her colleagues respected her discipline and instinct. Criminals whispered her name with resentment and fear. She had been known for her iron will, her relentless pursuit of justice. But now, stripped of her badge and gun, lying unconscious on a hospital bed, she looked fragile, her face pale, her body twitching with spasms the doctors couldn't explain. It had all started only hours earlier. At precisely 3:42 a.m., Laura and her partner, Detective Jason Miller, had been patrolling a quiet stretch of the South Side. Their squad car idled near an abandoned warehouse, a known hotspot for gang activity. Jason had stepped out for a moment to check a side alley, and when he returned, he found Laura collapsed on the ground beside the cruiser, convulsing uncontrollably. Her service weapon was still holstered, her radio untouched, her body free of any visible wounds. No blood, no trauma. Just a healthy woman suddenly at the brink of death. Jason panicked, calling in an emergency as he tried to steady her head against the cold concrete. "Officer down. She's seizing. No gunshots, no injuries. We need paramedics now." His voice cracked as the sound of Laura's teeth clattering against each other filled the night. Within minutes, the wail of an ambulance siren tore through the streets, carrying her away to St. Mary's General. Inside the emergency bay, Dr. Rebecca Lawson, a veteran in her 50s and chief of emergency medicine, took charge. She had seen chaos before, gunshot victims dragged in from gang wars, overdose cases that teetered on the edge of death, heart attacks that stopped men in their prime. But Laura's case unsettled her instantly. Convulsions, labored breathing, irregular heart rhythms, collapsing neurological function, every symptom told a story, but the stories didn't match. Rebecca ordered immediate scans and labs. The CT showed no brain injury. Cardiac tests came back, showing a heart structurally normal, but working erratically, skipping beats. The toxicology screens were clear. Blood work didn't reveal infections or poisons. Nothing made sense. "Why is she dying?" Rebecca muttered under her breath, staring at the monitor as Laura's oxygen levels dipped again. Within hours, the hospital assembled its elite. Specialists arrived one by one. Dr. Anthony Green, head neurologist. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a sharp-eyed toxicologist. Dr. Howard Kaplan, chief cardiologist. They crowded into conference rooms, reviewing charts, blood reports, scans. They argued over possible explanations. A rare autoimmune condition, a hidden aneurysm, a fast-moving infection, but every test slammed the door shut on another theory. Meanwhile, upstairs in the hospital chapel, Captain Renee Collins of the Chicago PD sat with Laura's parents, who had driven overnight from Milwaukee. The captain flipped through Laura's recent case files in her lap. Laura had been fearless these past months, tackling cases no one else wanted. She had busted a fentanyl pipeline, testified against a high-ranking mob lieutenant, and even confronted 2 officers suspected of corruption. Any of those moves could have made her enemies. Was this a slow revenge? Something planted in her food, her drink, her environment? Renee couldn't find a single clue in the paperwork. Nothing suggested an obvious threat. But in her gut, she felt this wasn't random. Back in the ICU, Dr. Evelyn Carter worked tirelessly, running panel after panel of toxicology. She tested for heavy metals, mercury, lead, arsenic, nothing. She tested for opioids, designer drugs, obscure plant toxins, all negative. "This is impossible," she admitted quietly to Dr. Green. "Her body is screaming toxic exposure, but science refuses to agree." 3 floors above Laura's bed, past the heavy steel doors and armed guards, was the county detention unit, an unusual arrangement that shared the same hospital complex. Among the prisoners, there was Daniel Ruiz, a former paramedic with 12 years of service on Chicago's ambulance teams. He had been convicted of armed robbery 3 years earlier, a desperate crime born of debt and addiction. His fall from grace was bitter. From saving lives on the streets, he had become just another number in a jumpsuit. But inside those walls, Daniel never stopped being a medic. Inmates sought him out when their chest hurt, when their sugar dropped, when their pulse raced. He knew more than most prison doctors, and everyone, guards included, relied on his instincts. Word traveled quickly in prison. An officer was dying downstairs. Some inmates laughed, muttering that it was payback from the streets. But Daniel felt differently. He had seen too many bodies fail in mysterious ways. He couldn't shake the description whispered to him by a nurse he knew: seizures, arrhythmias, collapsing lungs. He lay awake on his bunk, replaying it all in his mind like he used to after a night shift on the ambulance. 20 doctors downstairs and they're baffled, he thought. If they can't see it, maybe they're not looking from the right angle. Daniel knew from experience that emergencies didn't always follow textbook rules. Sometimes the cause wasn't in the blood or the brain scans. It was in the environment, the unseen dangers that medicine often overlooked. Downstairs, Laura's monitors kept screaming, her vitals worsening with each passing hour. Doctors scribbled notes, families prayed, officers clenched their fists in frustration. And somewhere above, in a locked cell behind reinforced glass, a convict-turned-paramedic whispered to himself, "I think I know what's killing her." Detective Jason Miller hadn't left the waiting room since Laura was rushed into the ICU. His shirt was still stained with the dust and oil from the street where she had collapsed, his hands trembling as he replayed the moment over and over again. He had seen her take on gunfire, seen her interrogate mobsters without blinking, but he had never seen her powerless like that. Jason carried guilt like a weight pressing on his chest. He was her partner. He was supposed to watch her back. And yet he hadn't even seen what had struck her down. The hospital corridors buzzed with tension. Nurses moved briskly. Police officers stood guard at the entrances. And reporters began to gather outside the building, catching wind of the story that one of Chicago's toughest detectives was fighting for her life. The chief of police had already called, demanding updates every hour. Inside, though, there were only frustrated doctors, monitors full of unexplained chaos, and a detective slipping further away. Dr. Rebecca Lawson convened another emergency meeting in the conference wing. Around a long table, the specialist sat with papers scattered, blood charts taped to walls, and Laura's scans glowing on monitors. "We're missing something," Rebecca said sharply. Her tired eyes darted from one face to another. "She's young, she's healthy. No history of heart disease, no genetic disorders, no substance abuse. A person doesn't collapse like this without a trigger. Something external, something hidden." Dr. Green, the neurologist, leaned forward. "The brain activity is erratic, patterns consistent with toxic exposure. But we've tested for every toxin on the board. Heavy metals, volatile chemicals, even obscure poisons. Nothing matches." Dr. Carter, the toxicologist, shook her head. "Not exactly nothing. Some of the enzyme markers in her cells are unusual, not absent, not broken, but disrupted. As if something's interfering with her metabolism on a cellular level. But I can't identify what." The silence that followed was heavy. Outside the window, the night was turning into morning, and the skyline of Chicago glowed under gray clouds. Meanwhile, upstairs in the secure prison ward, Daniel Ruiz was being led back from a routine checkup. His wrists were cuffed, but his eyes were sharp, restless, searching. A young nurse he recognized, Maria Torres, had been the one to check his vitals. Her usual chatter was muted, her face strained with worry. Daniel noticed immediately. "Tough night?" he asked, his tone casual but his gaze focused. Maria hesitated, glancing at the guard before lowering her voice. "It's that detective they brought in. Everyone's losing their minds. No one knows what's happening to her." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What symptoms?" Maria frowned. "I can't say." "Come on, Maria." Daniel pressed, his voice a whisper. "You and I both know. I've seen things in the field most doctors here never will. You don't have to name her. Just tell me what you've seen." Maria looked around, then sighed. "Seizures. Her heart skipping beats. She can barely breathe without machines. Neurological function is crashing, but her blood tests are clean. Everything is negative." "It doesn't make sense." Daniel froze. The list replayed in his head like puzzle pieces falling into place. Seizures, arrhythmias, respiratory collapse. No toxins detected. He'd seen this before, twice, maybe 3 times on the streets. Cases that baffled hospital doctors because they didn't fit the book. One was a factory worker exposed to chemicals no one tested for. Another was a man whose car exhaust leak poisoned him slowly until his body nearly shut down. His heart pounded. Could it be the same? That night in his cell, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He remembered the workers he had treated in the field, the strange smells of sulfur and rot, the way their bodies betrayed them without a trace left in their blood. He remembered their confusion, the helplessness of doctors who couldn't find answers. "Something environmental," he whispered to himself. "Something she breathed in. Something they'll never test for because they don't think to look there." Downstairs, Jason Miller sat by Laura's bedside. He'd argued with the nurses until they allowed him 5 minutes in the ICU. Laura's body twitched faintly, her eyelids fluttering but never opening. Jason gripped her cold hand. "You don't get to leave like this," he muttered, his voice cracking. "You fought harder than anyone. You dragged me out of gunfire last year. You saved kids from that fire. You don't get to die from nothing. You hear me, Laura? You fight. You keep fighting." Tears burned in his eyes. He lowered his head to the blanket, unable to watch her chest rise and fall with the ventilator's hiss. Upstairs, Daniel sat up suddenly in his bunk. He couldn't keep this to himself. If he was right, she was dying from something that wouldn't show up on standard tests. Something the hospital would never catch until it was too late. The problem was, no one wanted advice from a convict, especially when the patient was a police officer. If Daniel walked into a doctor's office and said, "I think I know what's killing her," they'd laugh, or worse, shut him down. But Daniel had spent 12 years saving lives, and he wasn't about to sit back while someone died just because he wore an orange jumpsuit now. The next morning, during his psychiatric evaluation, Daniel made his move. Dr. Richard Hale, the prison's medical director, sat across from him with a clipboard asking routine questions. Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Doc, I need you to listen. That detective downstairs, they've got 20 specialists working, right?" Dr. Hale raised an eyebrow. "And how would you know that?" "Word spreads," Daniel said quickly. "Doesn't matter how. What matters is, I think I know what they're missing," Hale scoffed. "You're a convict, Ruiz. They don't need theories from someone who—" "I was a paramedic for 12 years, Daniel snapped, his eyes blazing. "I've pulled people out of collapsed buildings, chemical leaks, industrial accidents. I've seen cases where the lab tests came back clean, but the patient was dying in front of me. This is the same. I'm telling you, I know what to look for." The room went quiet. Hale studied him, skeptical but unsettled by the conviction in his voice. "And what exactly do you think is killing her?" Daniel hesitated, then leaned closer. "Hydrogen sulfide exposure. Chronic, low level, probably from her environment. If it's what I think, her squad car might be the source. Exhaust leaks can produce it under the right conditions. It won't show up on standard tox screens. It breaks down too fast. But the enzyme damage in her cells would match." Hale's pen stopped moving. His skepticism remained, but something in Daniel's tone gnawed at him. He had seen Daniel's instincts before, diagnosing another inmate's heart failure when even the staff missed it. "If you're wrong, "Ruiz," Hale said slowly, "you'll waste everyone's time." Daniel locked eyes with him. "And if I'm right, she dies without anyone ever knowing why." For a long moment, Hale was silent. Finally, he stood, tucking the clipboard under his arm. "I'll make a call." Back in the ICU, Laura's monitors wailed again. Her heart rate dropped, alarms flashing red as nurses rushed to stabilize her. Her mother sobbed in the hallway. Jason shouted at the doctors for answers, and Captain Renee gritted her teeth in helpless rage. But far above, in a quiet office, a prison doctor picked up the phone and dialed the toxicology department. And with that single call, the course of Laura's life and the hidden truth behind her collapse was about to change. The toxicology department at St. Mary's General was in disarray when Dr. Richard Hale's call came through. Dr. Evelyn Carter had been awake for nearly 30 hours straight, her desk littered with empty coffee cups and lab reports that led nowhere. She rubbed her temples as the phone rang, thinking it was just another administrative request. "Hale from the detention unit," the voice said. "I've got a consultation for you." Evelyn's tone was curt. "Doctor, with all due respect, this is not the time. We've got one of Chicago's best detectives in multi-organ failure, and we're running out of options." "I know," Hale replied. "That's why you need to hear this. A former paramedic up here, yes, he's an inmate, believes the patient's symptoms match hydrogen sulfide exposure. Chronic low level, possibly environmental. He says the squad car could be the source." For a moment, Evelyn didn't speak. The hum of lab machines filled the silence. Finally, she whispered, "Hydrogen sulfide." "H2S?" She quickly pulled up Laura's enzyme panel results. The disruptions she couldn't explain, the strange inconsistencies, suddenly aligned like puzzle pieces snapping together. "But that gas doesn't linger in the blood," she muttered to herself. "By the time she reached us, it would have broken down." "Exactly," Hale interrupted. "The paramedic says standard tox screens won't show it. You have to test for metabolic byproducts, sulfahemoglobin, cytochrome, enzyme interference. He's seen this before." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. If this inmate was right, they weren't just fighting an invisible enemy, they had been fighting it in the wrong way entirely. She grabbed her phone and barked orders to her team. "Run specialized enzyme assays now. Full metabolic markers. Focus on sulfahemoglobin patterns. And call maintenance. Get Laura Mitchell's squad car impounded and inspected immediately." Down in the ICU, Detective Jason Miller watched helplessly as alarms shrieked again. Laura's heart rate dipped dangerously low before stabilizing. Nurses adjusted drips, checked monitors, their faces masks of professional urgency, hiding the fear they all felt. Jason leaned closer to her, whispering through clenched teeth, "Laura, if you can hear me, hold on. Someone's going to figure this out. You don't quit, not like this." In another wing of the hospital, Captain Renee Collins received the urgent news. The squad car Laura had been driving was already towed into the department's garage for standard inspection. Renee didn't hesitate. She called the mechanic unit herself. "This isn't routine," she said, her voice clipped with command. "I want every inch of that car examined. Exhaust, catalytic converter, air intake. Look for leaks, corrosion, anything. And I want hazardous materials on site to check for chemical residue." Meanwhile, Daniel Ruiz sat quietly in his cell, staring at the wall. His pulse raced as he imagined what was happening downstairs. He had risked everything by telling Hale. If the doctors dismissed his theory, he'd go back to being just another inmate, maybe even punished for interfering. But if he was right, if they listened, it could save her life. Hours crawled by. In the toxicology lab, Dr. Carter hovered over test results as they printed one by one. Her breath caught in her throat. Elevated sulfahemoglobin. Enzyme disruption patterns consistent with H2S poisoning. Subtle but undeniable. She slammed the file shut and raced toward the ICU conference room. By the time she arrived, Dr. Lawson, Dr. Green, and the rest of the team were already gathered, staring at Laura's failing vitals. Evelyn burst into the room, her voice sharp. "Stop everything. We've got a lead. This isn't infection, it isn't genetics. It's hydrogen sulfide exposure. Chronic poisoning from an external source, likely her squad car." Gasps filled the room. Green frowned. That's rare, almost unheard of in a case like this. Unheard of doesn't mean impossible, Carter snapped back. Her enzyme damage matches perfectly. And I just got word. The police garage found cracks in the exhaust manifold, positioned directly beneath the cabin intake. Every time she ran ventilation, she was breathing poison. The room erupted in stunned silence. Then Rebecca Lawson slammed her fist on the table. Enough talking. Get her on high-concentration oxygen therapy immediately. Start antioxidant protocols, sodium nitrite, hyperbaric oxygen if necessary. We're treating her for H2S exposure right now. Within minutes, nurses rushed to switch Laura's ventilator system, flooding her lungs with pure oxygen. IV drips were replaced with specialized medications designed to stabilize her cellular metabolism. Her frail body trembled as her systems adjusted, but for the first time in days, the doctors weren't fumbling in the dark. They had a target, Jason. Standing just outside the ICU doors, watched as the team swarmed around her. He couldn't hear the details, but he could feel the shift in energy. For days, every movement had been tinged with desperation. Now there was urgency with direction, purpose instead of panic. Captain Renee arrived minutes later, storming through the hallway with 2 mechanics behind her. She carried a file of photos showing the squad car's damaged exhaust system. She slapped it onto Rebecca's desk. Your inmate paramedic was right. That car was a death trap, Rebecca froze. Inmate paramedic? Renee's eyes narrowed. Yes, word came from upstairs. Someone locked away in that detention unit saw what none of us could. He gave us the answer. The doctors exchanged looks of disbelief. But Rebecca felt something different, relief mixed with humility. 20 specialists, thousands of dollars in tests, and the breakthrough had come from a convict with nothing but memory and instinct. Back in his cell, Daniel Ruiz lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, as if trying to hear the heartbeat of the hospital below. He didn't know the results yet. He didn't know if they believed him. But in his chest, there was a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, he had done what he was born to do, fight for a life on the edge of death, and somewhere beneath him, in a sterile ICU room surrounded by beeping machines, Laura Mitchell's heart monitor began to steady. Her oxygen levels rose. The storm inside her body slowed. For the first time in a week, her life was no longer slipping away. For the first time in days, the ICU at St. Mary's General no longer felt like a graveyard of unanswered questions. The machines still hummed, the alarms still chirped now and then, but there was a difference in the room. Purpose. Doctors weren't chasing shadows anymore. They had an enemy with a name. Hydrogen sulfide. Dr. Rebecca Lawson stood at the foot of Laura Mitchell's bed, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as she watched every adjustment the nurses made. Keep her oxygen at maximum concentration, she ordered. Monitor her cardiac rhythms closely. I want enzyme levels checked every 2 hours. If there's any sign of deterioration, we escalate to hyperbaric treatment immediately. Laura lay still, her chest rising and falling with the ventilator's rhythm, but there were subtle changes. The twitching in her limbs slowed. The violent spasms that once racked her body began to fade. Her heart monitor, once a jagged mess of arrhythmias, started finding steadier beats. Jason Miller, sitting just outside the glass window, pressed his hand to the barrier, whispering to himself, "Come on, partner. You've beaten worse. You can beat this too." His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, but he refused to move, afraid that if he left, she'd slip away. Meanwhile, in the hospital's administrative offices, Captain Renee Collins was locked in a heated conversation with Deputy Chief Walters. The photos of the squad car's corroded exhaust lay spread across the desk between them. "This isn't just about Detective Mitchell," Renee snapped. "That vehicle could have killed any one of us. How many other cars in our fleet are death traps waiting to happen?" Walters shifted uncomfortably. "Maintenance logs say, forget the logs." Renee slammed her fist on the desk. "Logs don't breathe the air inside those cars. Laura almost died because someone cut corners. I want a full inspection of every vehicle in the department, starting today. And I want answers from the manufacturer. If this is a defect, it's not just our department at risk. It's departments across the country." Back in the toxicology lab, Dr. Evelyn Carter reviewed the enzyme reports again. The results were clear. Laura's body had been under chronic, low-level exposure for weeks, maybe months. No wonder her headaches had gone unnoticed, her fatigue dismissed as stress. The poison had been creeping silently, wearing her down, until one night her body finally gave up. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she made notes. How many other officers brushed this off? How many never realized they were being poisoned in their own cars? In her cell upstairs, Laura's mother sat praying, her rosary beads clicking softly in her fingers. Her father sat silently beside her, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. When Dr. Lawson stepped into the waiting room, they both looked up, desperate for hope. "She's responding," Lawson said gently. "The treatment is working. It's going to be a long recovery, but she's fighting." Her mother broke down in sobs of relief, clutching at Lawson's arm. "God bless you, Doctor. God bless all of you." But Rebecca felt the weight of truth pressing against her chest. It wasn't her brilliance, or even her team's, that cracked the mystery. It was the insight of a man behind bars, a man whose name the family would probably never hear. Far above, in the detention unit, Daniel Ruiz leaned against the cold bars of his cell, watching as evening shadows stretched across the floor. He hadn't heard anything, no official word, but something in his gut told him she was stabilizing. He thought about the first time he'd smelled hydrogen sulfide on the job. A sewer worker, dragged out unconscious, his body limp, doctors puzzled, until Daniel remembered a faint, rotten egg odor. The memory haunted him now. How easily this detective could have died for the same reason. His cellmate, a lanky man named Torres, noticed Daniel's faraway look. "Why are you pacing like that, Ruiz? You look like you're waiting on a verdict." Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. "In a way I am," Torres snorted. "Word is, you stuck your nose where it didn't belong. Helped a cop. You know that won't make you popular around here." Daniel shrugged. "Doesn't matter. If she lives, it's worth it." Torres studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're a strange one, Ruiz. Most of us in here, we're trying to forget the world outside. You still trying to save it?" Daniel didn't answer. He lay back on his cot, staring at the ceiling, the ghostly hum of memories filling his head. Ambulance sirens, desperate cries, the adrenaline of snatching life back from death. He thought he had lost that forever when he came here. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't gone. By the next morning, signs of improvement were undeniable. Laura's EEG showed brain activity stabilizing. Her heart rhythm steadied. Nurses noted she was initiating some breaths on her own, her lungs no longer fully dependent on the machine. The small victories spread like wildfire through the staff. Smiles in the hallways, a flicker of hope after days of despair. Jason was allowed into the room again. He sat by her side, holding her hand carefully. "You hear that?" he whispered. "They say you're getting better. That means I'm not done buying you coffee after late shifts. You still owe me dinner from last week, remember?" Her eyelids fluttered faintly, a tiny twitch, but Jason caught it, his heart leaping. He pressed her hand tighter. "That's it. Come back to me, Laura." Meanwhile, Captain Renee convened a press briefing outside the hospital. She stood in front of cameras, flanked by uniformed officers, her voice steady. "Detective Mitchell is stable and showing signs of recovery. Preliminary findings suggest her collapse was due to an environmental hazard linked to her patrol vehicle. Effective immediately, all vehicles in our department will undergo inspection and repair. The safety of our officers is non-negotiable." Reporters fired questions. Flashes from cameras illuminated the night. But Renee gave no details about the prison inmate who had been the key to unlocking the case. That truth remained buried, known only to a handful of people. In the ICU conference room later that evening, Dr. Lawson confided quietly to Evelyn Carter. "Can you imagine? 20 of us, with all the technology in the world, and the breakthrough comes from someone behind bars." Evelyn sighed, her eyes heavy. "It doesn't matter where it came from. It matters that it saved her." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Still, it makes you wonder how many other answers we ignore because of where they come from. Upstairs, Daniel Ruiz finally heard the confirmation he'd been waiting for. A guard passing by muttered to another, "That cop's pulling through. Looks like she's gonna make it." Daniel closed his eyes, a smile ghosting across his face. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of victory. Not the kind won in a courtroom or a battlefield, but the kind only a medic knew. The quiet triumph of snatching someone back from death. And though his name would never be spoken in the hospital corridors below, he knew in his bones that Detective Laura Mitchell was alive because he hadn't stopped believing that knowledge. Wherever it lived, even inside a prison cell, could still save a life. The days that followed felt like a long, fragile dawn breaking over St. Mary's General Hospital. For nearly a week, the ICU had been a place of dread, a corridor where footsteps echoed like the ticking of a clock winding down. But now, slowly, the tide was turning. The staff moved with a new rhythm, cautious but hopeful. Every beep of the heart monitor, every incremental rise in oxygen saturation, felt like a victory. Detective Laura Mitchell, though still unconscious most of the time, was no longer slipping further into the abyss. Her EEG readings showed a gradual return to stable brain activity. Her lungs, once completely dependent on the ventilator, began to make their own halting efforts at breathing. And her heart, stubborn, relentless, kept pushing blood through her veins with a steadier rhythm. Jason Miller never left her side. Nurses had given up trying to convince him to rest. He sat through long nights in the hard chair by her bed, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes just talking to her about anything and everything, cases they'd worked, inside jokes only they understood, the things left unsaid in their partnership. He spoke in whispers, but always as if she could hear. "Remember that night on Wabash Avenue?" he murmured one evening, his eyes red from exhaustion. "We pulled over that junkie waving a knife, and you just stared him down like he was a schoolboy caught stealing candy. You told me later, Jason, half this job is making them believe you're scarier than they are. Damn, Laura, you were right. You've always been right, so don't you dare quit now. You've got more lessons to teach me." Outside the ICU, Captain Renee Collins juggled battles of her own. The discovery of the faulty exhaust system in Laura's squad car had triggered a wave of inspections across the department. What they found was chilling. Nearly a dozen vehicles showed similar damage. Corroded exhaust manifolds, leaking seals, compromised catalytic converters. 3 cars were immediately declared unsafe, their drivers potentially days away from the same fate Laura had suffered. Renee convened emergency meetings with city officials and the police union. "We were inches away from losing not just one detective, but many," she told them, her voice tight with anger. "This isn't negligence anymore, it's systemic failure. If our officers can't even trust their patrol cars, then what are we doing?" At the same time, Dr. Evelyn Carter finalized the specialized toxicology reports. The results were undeniable. Laura's enzyme disruption, her sulfhemoglobin levels, her neurological collapse, all pointed to chronic hydrogen sulfide poisoning. She drafted the report carefully, knowing it would become a cornerstone case for medical journals. Yet as she wrote, a strange discomfort gnawed at her. The truth behind how they had solved it, the whisper from a prison cell, was nowhere in the official documentation. In the detention unit, Daniel Ruiz received no updates. The walls between his world and the hospital's were thick, reinforced with steel and silence. But word filtered through in fragments. Guards talking, nurses passing by. "The cop's still holding on," one said. "Doctors think she might make it." Daniel listened in silence, his expression unreadable. At night, lying on his cot, he thought about her. He imagined the machines, the doctors, the family waiting. He imagined her struggle to breathe, her body clawing back toward life. And he remembered every patient he had ever treated who looked the same, faces pale, lips blue, eyes rolling back. Some he saved, some he didn't. The difference often came down to a single decision, a single realization. And now it was his realization that kept Laura alive. But inside the prison, word of his involvement was spreading. Some inmates muttered in resentment. Ruiz thinks he's a hero now, saving cops? Who's he trying to impress? Others respected him in silence, remembering how he had diagnosed their own hidden illnesses when prison doctors brushed them off. Daniel ignored the talk. He had never done this for recognition. He had done it because he couldn't forget the oath he once lived by. Do no harm, save who you can, no matter who they are. On the 6th day after treatment began, Laura stirred. It was subtle at first, a twitch of her fingers, a faint shift in her breathing. Jason, half asleep in the chair, shot upright.
Laura?
He whispered, leaning close. Her eyelids fluttered, then closed again. He rushed to call the nurse. By the time staff swarmed the room, Laura had slipped back into stillness, but her brain activity monitor spiked with new patterns. It was the first undeniable sign that she was clawing her way back to consciousness. Dr. Lawson briefed the family later that morning. She's showing neurological responses, she explained, pointing to the chart. It may take time, but it means she's fighting to wake up. Laura's mother sobbed into her husband's arms, whispering prayers of thanks. Jason stood in the corner, his chest heaving with relief. Captain Renee, though relieved, felt her instincts sharpen. A question had been gnawing at her since the diagnosis. Was this truly just a tragic mechanical failure? Or had someone tampered with Laura's vehicle? Laura had made enemies, powerful ones. A faulty exhaust could be negligence, but deliberate sabotage. That would mean she hadn't just been unlucky. She had been targeted. That night, Renee ordered a forensic team to re-examine Laura's squad car with a new lens, not just as a defective vehicle, but as a potential crime scene. Every bolt, every joint, every inch of corrosion would be inspected for signs of deliberate interference. She knew Laura would want the truth, and she wouldn't rest until she had it. Meanwhile, Dr. Carter sat alone in her office, staring at the official report she had just finished. It credited the medical team's persistence and the toxicology lab's innovation. It mentioned the discovery of the vehicle defect, the rapid response once identified. But it said nothing about Daniel Ruiz, nothing about the inmate who had whispered the answer that 20 specialists couldn't see. She thought about adding a line, some acknowledgement, but she hesitated, imagining the reaction of her colleagues, the scorn of the medical board. In the end, she pressed save, sealing away the truth. Laura's slow return to consciousness began 2 days later. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused, before closing again. But each time, she stayed awake longer, her gaze wandering the room, her lips forming faint sounds. Jason was there for every moment, holding her hand, talking her through it. "You're safe," he whispered when her eyes darted in panic. "You're in the hospital. You're gonna be okay." The first time she tried to speak, her voice was barely a rasp. Jason leaned close, straining to hear. Her lips moved, forming a single broken word. "Car." Jason froze. She remembered. She knew something had been wrong even before her body gave out. He squeezed her hand, his mind racing. "Don't worry. We figured it out. You're safe now." But inside, unease gnawed at him. If Laura had suspected the car, why hadn't she said anything earlier? Had she known she was being poisoned? Or worse, had she suspected someone tampered with it? As Laura drifted back into sleep, Jason sat in the chair, staring at her pale face. The relief of her survival mixed uneasily with a new dread. The case wasn't over. The real story behind what had almost killed her was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And upstairs, in a barred cell, Daniel Ruiz whispered into the darkness, "Fight, detective. Fight your way back. The world still needs you." The ICU was quieter now, no longer a battlefield of alarms and rushing footsteps, but a chamber of fragile recovery. The nurses whispered when they moved around Detective Laura Mitchell's bed, aware that every sound might pull her too quickly into a world she wasn't ready for. The fluorescent light above flickered faintly, casting pale shadows over her face. Her eyelids trembled again and again, each flutter a victory, each blink a small defiance against death. Jason Miller hadn't left the room in 2 days. His beard had grown uneven, his uniform jacket crumpled in the chair beside him. He looked more like a man who had been living in the hospital than a detective. His eyes locked on Laura's every movement, as if his will alone could anchor her to life. When her lips parted and the faintest whisper came, Jason leaned so close his ear almost touched her mouth. "Car." The word was soft, broken, like wind through cracked glass. Jason froze. He had heard it before, but now it was clearer, intentional. She was remembering. He pressed her hand gently. "I know, Laura. We checked. It was the car. You're safe now." Her eyes opened just enough to show a glint of awareness, but fear lingered there. She tried again, her voice rasping. "Not accident." Her chest heaved with the effort, and the monitor spiked. Jason felt his blood run cold. Not an accident. Her mind, even half broken by the poison, was pointing towards something darker. He pressed her hand, whispering urgently, "Rest. Save your strength. We'll figure it out. I promise." Outside, Captain Renee Collins stood by the observation window, arms folded tightly. She had seen Jason's lips move, seen Laura's faint responses. When Jason stepped out minutes later, Renee caught his arm. What did she say? Jason hesitated, torn between protecting Laura's fragile state and sharing the truth. Finally, he whispered, "She said it wasn't an accident." Renee's eyes hardened. "Then we treat it like attempted murder." That same night, forensic specialists swarmed the police garage where Laura's patrol car had been stored. Floodlights illuminated the vehicle, its hood propped open like a cadaver on a table. Mechanics with gloves and magnifiers combed every inch. A faint scorch mark near the catalytic converter caught their attention. A bolt was looser than it should have been, threads stripped in a way that suggested deliberate tampering. The lead inspector straightened, his face grim. "Captain, this wasn't just wear and tear. Somebody wanted this car leaking exhaust." Renee's jaw clenched. "Get me a full report. Chain of custody, fingerprints, anything." The revelation changed everything. What once looked like tragic negligence was now a homicide attempt. A slow, invisible weapon designed to look like mechanical failure. Whoever had done this knew it would leave almost no trace, that doctors would be baffled, that Laura might never wake to tell the truth. Back at the hospital, Dr. Rebecca Lawson reviewed Laura's progress with a team of specialists. "Her lungs are stronger. We can start weaning her off the ventilator in intervals. Neurological tests show improvement, though there are memory gaps." She glanced at the chart. "But she's aware enough to speak. That means the worst has passed." Dr. Evelyn Carter lingered after the meeting, staring at Laura through the glass. Her mind kept circling back to Daniel Ruiz. The inmate had given them the answer no one else could see. And now, if Laura's words were true, his warning had not just saved her life, but revealed a crime. Evelyn wrestled with herself. Should she tell Rebecca? Should she tell the captain? Or was it safer to keep the truth buried? In the detention ward upstairs, Daniel sat at a metal table in the common room, flipping through a battered medical journal from the prison library. The other inmates eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Word had spread fast. Ruiz had helped save a cop. For some, it was betrayal. For others, grudging respect. Torres, his cellmate, leaned over. "So it's true? You're the reason she's still breathing." Daniel kept his eyes on the page. "Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter?" Torres scoffed. "You realize what you did? You stuck your neck out for someone who'd have locked you up without blinking." "Why?" Daniel finally looked up, his gaze steady. "Because dying like that, slow, suffocating, nobody knowing why, isn't something I'd wish on anyone. Cop or criminal, doesn't matter. A life is a life." Torres shook his head. "You're either the dumbest guy in here or the only one who remembers what it's like to be human." Later that night, Dr. Hale visited the detention ward under the pretense of routine rounds. He stopped by Daniel's cell, lowering his voice. "She's improving. Your hunch was right. The doctors are treating it as hydrogen sulfide poisoning." Daniel exhaled slowly, relief flooding his face. "Then she'll live." Hale nodded. Then after a pause added, "There's more. The department believes the car was tampered with. They're calling it an attempted murder." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "The pieces fit too perfectly now. He had suspected chronic exposure, but deliberate sabotage meant someone had calculated every breath Laura took. He leaned closer to the bars. Then whoever did it isn't done. They wanted her silent for a reason. If she wakes up, she'll be a target again. Down in the ICU, Laura's recovery accelerated. She could now sit upright with help, though her body shook from the effort. Physical therapists guided her through breathing exercises, coaxing her lungs back to strength. Every step was exhausting, but Laura's spirit, battered but unbroken, kept pushing. Jason brought her updates about the department but left out the darker details for now. "The chief sends his regards," he said with a smile, though his eyes were heavy with secrets. "Whole precinct's waiting for you to come back. They even left your desk untouched." Laura's lips curved faintly. Her voice was weak but clear enough. "Bet it's still a mess." Jason laughed softly, tears stinging his eyes. Even half paralyzed by poison, she was still Laura, sarcastic, relentless. But when Captain Renee entered, Laura's expression changed. Her gaze sharpened, her voice rasping. "It wasn't the car. Breaking down. Someone did it," Renee nodded gravely. "We know, and we're going to find out who." As Laura drifted back to sleep, Renee glanced at Jason, her voice low. "From now on, we treat this as a high-risk case. No visitors without clearance. She's a target, and until we know who's behind this, she's not safe." Outside, in the shadows of the hospital parking lot, a dark figure lingered near the edge of the streetlights. He watched the entrance with cold, patient eyes, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. When he exhaled, the smoke curled upward into the night air. Laura Mitchell had survived what should have killed her. But for the one who had orchestrated it, survival wasn't part of the plan, and the game was far from over. The hospital room was no longer silent with the rhythm of machines alone. Detective Laura Mitchell could now sit up, with pillows propped behind her, her body frail, but her eyes carrying the same sharpness that once froze criminals in their tracks. Every breath still felt heavy, her voice a strained rasp, but she was no longer a ghost clinging to life. She was alive, aware, and carrying secrets that weighed heavier than the IV bags hanging by her bedside. Jason Miller sat close, as always, his chair practically glued to her side. He had memorized every line of her weak smile, every twitch of her hand as she gripped his. But now, as Laura asked him to lean closer, his heart raced. Her words weren't random anymore. They carried meaning. "Jason," she whispered, her throat dry. "The car!" I knew something was wrong before it happened. Weeks of headaches, dizziness. Thought it was stress, but that night I smelled it, rotten like sulfur. And just before I collapsed, I saw someone. Jason's hand tightened around hers. "Who?" Her eyes fluttered, straining against exhaustion. "Dark jacket, ball cap. He was by the squad car earlier. I thought it was nothing, then..." Black. Jason felt a chill crawl up his spine. "So you're saying someone tampered with it? You actually saw him?" She gave the faintest nod before drifting back into sleep, her strength spent. Jason stepped out into the corridor, his face grim. Captain Renee Collins was waiting just outside, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. One look at Jason's expression and she straightened. "What did she say?" Renee asked quietly. Jason took a deep breath. "She remembers someone near the car, before she collapsed. She thinks it was deliberate." Renee's jaw tightened. "Then we've moved past speculation. This is attempted murder, confirmed by the victim herself." That night, Renee gathered a small circle of trust inside a secure briefing room at the precinct. Just Jason, herself, and two trusted forensic investigators. Spread across the table were the photographs of Laura's squad car, the corroded exhaust manifold, the stripped bolts, the unnatural scorch marks. The lead forensic tech, Angela Rivera, pointed with her pen. This wasn't natural wear. Someone tampered with it, made sure the exhaust leaked directly under the cabin intake. Whoever did this knew exactly what effect it would have. Jason leaned forward, anger simmering in his voice. So this wasn't just a lucky guess. They planned to kill her slowly, in a way no doctor could detect. Angela nodded grimly. And they almost succeeded. If she'd collapsed 30 minutes later, she'd be in the morgue instead of the ICU. Renee studied the photos, her face hard as stone. The question is, who knew her schedule? Who had access to her car? Who wanted her silenced badly enough to go through all this trouble? Jason's mind raced through the cases Laura had worked recently. The cartel bust, the trafficking ring, the corruption probe. Each one came with enemies who would love nothing more than to see her buried. "We need to look inside the department too," Jason muttered. If this was sabotage, it had to be someone with access to the motor pool. That's not random street-level work. That's inside knowledge. Renee didn't flinch. "I already ordered internal affairs to start digging quietly. If we've got a mole in the department, I want their face on this table before Laura wakes again." Meanwhile, back in the prison ward above St. Mary's, Daniel Ruiz sat across from Dr. Hale during evening rounds. Hale lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure no guards were listening. "They found evidence of tampering," Hale said. "Your theory about the squad car, it wasn't just damage. Someone made it happen." Daniel felt his gut twist. He had feared as much. Then she's still in danger. Whoever did this won't just stop because she survived. Hale studied him for a long moment. "Why does this matter to you so much? You've got no stake in her life." Daniel's eyes darkened, memories flickering behind them, faces of patients he had lost, the sound of families screaming when he couldn't save someone. "Because I've seen too many people die when the truth was ignored. And because once you start saving lives, Doc, you can't turn it off no matter where you are." Hale said nothing more, but when he left, he carried with him a nagging thought. Perhaps Daniel Ruiz wasn't just a convict playing doctor. Perhaps he was the only reason Detective Mitchell was still alive. 2 days later, Laura finally regained enough strength to hold a short conversation without collapsing into sleep. Jason and Renee sat by her bedside, a small recorder on the table to capture every word. Her voice cracked with effort, but her memory was sharper now. "I'd been working that trafficking case, the one with the warehouse by the docks. We seized shipments, arrested 6 men, but the ringleader, he got away. I was sure he had people watching me." Renee leaned in. "And you think one of them sabotaged your car?" Laura nodded faintly. "Yes, he warned me once, said I wouldn't live to testify against him. I thought it was just bluster." "Guess I was wrong." Jason clenched his fists. "If it's who I think it is, he's still out there. And he's not going to stop." Laura's lips curved into a weak, determined smile. "Then we stop him first." That night, in the shadows outside the hospital, the man in the dark jacket returned. He leaned against a lamppost, watching the guarded entrance, his cigarette glowing faintly. He spoke into a burner phone, his voice low and cold. "She's still alive. But not for long." The rain poured down over Chicago that night, streaking the hospital windows like veins of silver. Inside St. Mary's General, the ICU was dim, its machines blinking rhythmically as Detective Laura Mitchell slept under heavy sedation. The storm outside was loud, but not loud enough to drown out the unease creeping through the halls. The attempt on Laura's life had become more than just a mystery. It was now a war waiting to unfold. Captain Renee Collins stood by the window of the family waiting room, her reflection pale against the glass. She was reviewing files, Laura's recent cases, her enemies, the arrests that had rattled the city's underworld. On the top of the stack was the file on Victor Salazar, a trafficker with deep cartel ties. Laura had led the raid that seized his drugs, his men, and his money. But Victor himself had slipped away, like smoke through fingers. Rumors placed him in the city still, protected by corrupt allies. Jason entered the room quietly, dripping from the rain. He had been down at the motor pool, watching the forensic team pull apart Laura's destroyed squad car, piece by piece. His expression was grim. "They found fingerprints," he said, dropping a folder on the table. "Partial, but enough. They match one of Salazar's men, Marco Diaz, a mechanic by trade. He could have had access to the garage." Renee's eyes narrowed. "Then we're not just looking at a faulty exhaust. We're looking at infiltration inside our own department." Jason nodded. "Diaz was spotted near the motor pool weeks ago. Security thought nothing of it. He had the right clearance tags, but those tags were fake." The storm outside cracked with thunder, as if punctuating his words. Renee slammed the file shut. This isn't just about Laura. If Diaz got inside once, he can get inside again. That means Salazar's network is bigger and dirtier than we thought. In the ICU, Laura stirred again. Her body was still weak, her voice a rasp, but her mind burned with clarity. She motioned for the nurse to call Jason. When he arrived, she fixed her tired eyes on him. "You have to listen," she whispered. "Salazar didn't just want me dead. He wanted to send a message. The night before the raid, we intercepted a shipment that wasn't just drugs. It had files, documents linking him to people in the city, politicians, businessmen, maybe even someone in uniform. That's why he couldn't let me live." Jason froze. "You think someone on the inside helped him?" Laura's lips trembled with effort, but she nodded. "Yes, someone gave him access. Someone close." Jason's stomach churned. He wanted to reassure her, to promise she was safe, but he couldn't, not when the truth was this poisoned. Upstairs, in the detention ward, Daniel Ruiz lay awake in his cell. The storm outside rattled the bars, lightning flashing through the narrow window. He could feel it in his bones. Something was coming. Hale's words about tampering, Laura's survival, the silence afterward, it all pointed to danger not yet extinguished. Torres. His cellmate muttered from the bunk above. "You're pacing again, Ruiz. What is it this time?" Daniel didn't look up. "If they know she's alive, they'll try again." Poison failed. "Next time they'll be bolder." Torres laughed bitterly. "What do you care? She's a cop. Let them eat each other alive." Daniel's fists clenched, but he kept his voice calm. "She's a human being, and she's the only one who stood up against Salazar's ring. If she dies, half the city drowns in his poison." Torres went quiet, unsettled by the fire in Daniel's tone. At 2 a.m., the storm raged hardest. The hospital corridors were nearly empty, lights dimmed, most staff either on skeleton night shifts or asleep in on-call rooms. But in the shadows near the emergency exit, a man in a dark jacket moved silently. Marco Diaz. His cap was pulled low, his movements deliberate. In his pocket, a syringe glinted faintly under the flicker of lightning. He moved with the confidence of someone who had studied the hospital layout. He knew the camera's blind spots, the shift rotations, even the codes to restricted doors. Salazar had prepared him well. Tonight was not about chance. Tonight was about finishing what had begun in that squad car. He slipped past a sleeping guard, his footsteps silent on the linoleum. The ICU door was just ahead. Through the glass, he could see Laura lying unconscious, Jason dozing in the chair by her bed, exhaustion finally catching him. For a moment, Marco's lips curled into a sneer. Killing her now would be almost too easy, but just as he reached for the door handle, a voice behind him cut through the storm's howl. "Looking for someone?" Marco spun around. Captain Renee stood there, her sidearm raised, her eyes locked on him like steel. 2 plainclothes officers flanked her, weapons drawn. For a moment, Marco froze. Then he smirked, shrugging casually. "Just visiting a sick cop. Offering my condolences." Renee's jaw tightened. "Drop the syringe." Marco's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. "You can't protect her forever. Salazar's reach goes higher than you think. You take me in, someone else will finish the job." Jason, awakened by the commotion, burst out of the ICU room, his gun already drawn. When he saw Marco, his blood boiled. "You son of a—" He lunged, but Renee stopped him with a sharp gesture. "No," she said firmly. "We do this by the book. He's going to talk." Marco laughed darkly. "You think prison will keep me quiet? You think you've won? You've just stepped into a war you can't win." Still, he dropped the syringe, his smirk never fading as the officers cuffed him. Back in her bed. Laura opened her eyes at the sound of the commotion. Her heart monitor spiked, fear and fury battling in her chest. She saw Marco being dragged away and whispered hoarsely, "It's him!" Jason rushed back to her, gripping her hand. "He won't touch you again. We've got him." But Laura shook her head weakly, her voice trembling. "It's not just him. He's just a piece. Salazar's inside already. Someone's helping him." Her words chilled Jason and Renee alike. Even with Marco in custody, the real danger was still out there, hidden in plain sight, and as the storm outside began to ease, A darker storm was only beginning to gather, one that would test their trust, their loyalty, and their survival. The storm had passed over Chicago, but inside St. Mary's General, the tension only thickened. Marco Diaz was in custody, but no one on the task force felt relief. Laura Mitchell's faint words still echoed. It's not just him. Someone's helping Salazar. Captain Renee Collins wasted no time. That morning she convened a closed-door meeting at headquarters with Jason Miller, 2 forensic analysts, and internal affairs. On the table lay files, photographs, and a growing pile of evidence connecting Victor Salazar's cartel with city insiders. Angela Rivera, the forensic tech, pointed to a blown-up photo of the squad car's exhaust. The damage here wasn't random corrosion. It was done with precision tools, the kind only a trained mechanic or someone with access to police maintenance could manage. Jason clenched his jaw. So Diaz had help. Someone inside cleared his access. Who? Angela exchanged a grim look with Renee. We pulled maintenance logs. Someone signed off on the vehicle's last inspection, a Sergeant Paul Grayson. Jason's eyes widened. Grayson wasn't just anyone. He'd been Laura's mentor years ago, the one who vouched for her first promotion. The idea of him betraying her was a gut punch. Renee's voice was steady but cold. Grayson has debts, gambling, expensive ones. Salazar's network is known for buying out people exactly like him. We bring him in quietly. If he's dirty, he'll crack. Meanwhile, Laura's strength was returning in the ICU. She still moved slowly, her voice thin, but her mind was sharper every day. Physical therapists guided her through simple steps, lifting her arms, moving her legs, speaking for longer stretches. Jason visited between shifts, bringing her updates, but filtering the darker truths. But Laura was no fool. She saw the worry etched in Jason's face, the way Renee avoided telling her too much. She pressed Jason one afternoon, her eyes locking onto his. You're keeping something from me. Don't you dare. Not now, Jason sighed, defeated. We think someone inside helped Salazar. The name's Grayson. Laura's heart skipped. Grayson, the man who once taught her how to trust her instincts on the street. The man she had looked up to. No, she whispered, shaking her head weakly. Not him. He wouldn't. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear that maybe, just maybe, he would. That night, Renee and Jason led a quiet operation. Grayson was pulled into an interrogation room, the blinds drawn, the cameras rolling. He sat stiff, sweat beading on his forehead as Renee laid the photographs in front of him. The fake clearance tags, the maintenance logs, the fingerprints tying Diaz to the garage. Your signature, Renee said, tapping the log. Care to explain why you cleared a vehicle with a death trap under the hood? Grayson tried to bluster. I don't know how that happened. Must have been a clerical error. Jason slammed his hand on the table, leaning forward. Clerical error doesn't strip bolts, Paul. Laura almost died because of you. You think we won't bury you for this? Grayson's hands shook, his facade crumbling. Finally he muttered, I didn't have a choice. They knew about my debts. Salazar's men cornered me. They said if I didn't play along, my family would pay. His eyes darted desperately between them. I swear I didn't think it would kill her. I thought it was just intimidation. Renee's glare was ice. You handed her to them on a silver platter. Tears welled in Grayson's eyes. They've got people everywhere, judges, politicians, even uniforms. You can't stop them. Jason's voice dropped to a lethal calm. Watch us. When Renee informed Laura of Grayson's confession, the detective sat in silence for a long time, her frail body trembling with suppressed rage. He was supposed to protect us, she whispered. All those years. And he sold us out for money. Jason reached for her hand. Then we use him. If he's scared, he'll talk. And through him, we get Salazar. Laura's eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, burned with the fire of the detective she had always been. Then I want in. This isn't just about me surviving. It's about ending him, once and for all. The following week, under heavy guard, Laura was transferred from the ICU to a private recovery ward. Police stood outside her room around the clock, but danger still lingered. Twice, officers caught suspicious figures loitering near the hospital's perimeter. Once a nurse's badge was discovered to be counterfeit. Salazar's network was desperate, their grip slipping, and Laura's survival threatened to unravel everything. Daniel Ruiz, from his prison cell above, heard fragments of the chaos. Guards whispering about assassination attempts, rumors of corrupt cops falling like dominoes. He sat in silence, his hands clasped, thinking of Laura. He had saved her once with knowledge, but knowledge alone wouldn't stop Salazar. This war would require something more. The breakthrough came when Grayson, under protective custody, revealed a stash house location, a warehouse at the docks, the same area Laura had mentioned before collapsing. Renee organized a raid, determined to strike before Salazar could vanish again. Jason wanted Laura nowhere near it. But Laura, still weak but burning with resolve, argued from her hospital bed. "I know his patterns. I know his men. You'll miss him without me." Jason's voice cracked with anger. "You're barely walking. You think I'm dragging you into a kill zone?" Laura's eyes bored into his. "Jason, I almost died for this case. I won't let Salazar win from a hospital bed. Either you take me with you or I find another way." In the end, compromise came. Laura would not be on the front line, but she would direct the operation remotely, her instincts guiding the team like a commander from afar. The raid exploded into action on a foggy night at the docks. SWAT teams stormed the warehouse, gunfire cracking, shouts echoing across the water. Inside, crates of weapons and drugs were stacked high. Men scattered like rats, but one stood calm in the chaos. Victor Salazar himself, tall, cold-eyed, with a pistol in hand. Jason charged through the smoke, his weapon raised. "Salazar, drop it!" Salazar smirked, firing 2 shots before ducking behind cover. The firefight was brutal, metal clanging, bullets sparking against steel beams. Jason pressed forward, his heart pounding. From her hospital room, Laura's voice crackled over the radio. "He'll try to escape through the east dock. There's a hidden door behind the office." "Cut him off there!" Jason followed her call, leading his team around. And just as Salazar slipped through the hidden passage, Jason was waiting, his gun leveled. "It's over," Jason growled. Salazar sneered. "For me, maybe. But you'll never root us all out. The city already belongs to me." Jason didn't flinch. "Not anymore." He disarmed and cuffed him, dragging him out as officers secured the warehouse. The news of Salazar's capture spread like wildfire. For the first time in months, the city breathed easier. Laura, watching the live feed from her bed, felt tears streak down her cheeks. She had survived. She had fought back. And justice had finally caught up with the man who tried to bury her. But deep down, she knew the war wasn't over. Salazar would face trial, and his allies in high places would try to shield him. Yet she also knew she wasn't alone. Jason, Renee, even the unlikely hand of Daniel Ruiz, together. They had pulled her back from death and torn a hole in Salazar's empire. Days later, Laura took her first unassisted steps down the hospital hallway. Each step was shaky, painful, but they carried the weight of triumph. Officers lined the corridor, applauding softly. Jason walked beside her, steady but proud, and far above, in his barred cell, Daniel sat quietly, a small smile crossing his face as he heard the guards talk about the raid. The capture, the detective walking again. He would never be credited, never thanked. But he didn't need it. He knew the truth. His knowledge had saved her, and through her saved a city. Laura Mitchell had been to the edge of death and returned stronger. And though scars would remain, she was ready to fight again, not just for justice, but for the belief that truth, no matter where it comes from, even a convict's whisper, can change the world.